So Rupert, you're from Which Mortgage Advisors and you're the head of lending. So help us out from a landlord perspective. Why are buy-to-let mortgages different to an ordinary home loan?
Yeah, I guess lenders will view them as slightly higher risk. As a customer, you're not living in that property, looking after the property. You've got people in there that you might not necessarily know who are paying you to live in that property. So along with that comes some different products and different criteria, particularly around the amount of security that you need to have in that property. So deposit size will be a lot greater, so on average 25% deposit needed. There might be some slight variance to that. They will also pay more attention to the rental income as opposed to affordability and how much can be borrowed. And they will have various stress tests and methods that they calculate this, and that will determine the amount you can borrow as opposed to how much you earn and your personal income.
And what's a stress test?
It's an interesting one, and there have been some significant changes recently, but they are going to look at whether that rental that you receive will cover that mortgage payment and by what margin and at what rate. So what they want to do is ensure the borrower's not getting into problems that they're going to have, they're not going to have enough to cover the mortgage basically from the rent.
So if you're a landlord and you're remortgaging or you're going and doing a buy-to-let for the first time, how do you know how to choose a broker?
Firstly, I think it's very important when you're looking at buy-to-let that you do go to a broker. There are numerous lenders that you can't go to directly, so by not going to a broker, you might well be missing out on some really suitable products or the right product for you, which is really important. We've talked about the stress testing, we've talked about different criteria, varying to residential criteria, so it's really important that you speak to someone that's got an expert knowledge in that and knows which lenders might be more suitable for you. It's a bit more of a minefield in the residential mortgage, just because of every lender might have different stress tests, so it might not work with the one you go to on the high street, but it could work with someone else. So it's really important to speak to someone that looks across every lender out there.
So I guess it is important to have an expert, because you might be buying to renovate and then letting it later on, or letting your own home, so that's kind of why you need the expert guidance.
Definitely, for some people, first-time landlords, it's a big step, and they probably need some guidance, and there are other people to speak to, but a mortgage advisor will have that knowledge, will have dealt with a lot of people in the same situation, and will know what the right solution is for that customer.
And I suppose from a buy-to-let perspective, there may be times when you've got to buy something and you get a deal, but it's got to be done by a deadline. Is that still possible in the mortgage lending world?
I think so, and that's again why a broker is really important, because most brokers will monitor the timescales that each lender has. You might have some that need paper applications, which can take longer, some that will be quicker than others, some will instruct valuations immediately, some will wait till it's underwritten. So again, that knowledge from an independent and impartial advisor is really important.
Even the most dedicated landlords can have problems in their property. Tracy Ball rents out an attractive Victorian home to a young family. To make sure she can look after the property and the family, she took out specialist landlord insurance with Direct Line. Then one day she got a call from a tenant saying water was flooding out from the boiler.
When we got over to the property and we could see exactly what had happened, there was an external pipe that had actually come in to the live feed on the boiler and had actually burst up through the boiler itself. The tenant, being quite a young tenant, she didn't know where the stopcock was, so we had to locate the stopcock, which is why the whole area had flooded. So I think the immediate thing is when you get a crisis like that, it's all hands on deck, trying to make sure firstly children are safe and out of the way, and then secondly to make sure you start to sort of clean up the mess. What I did do is I did take some photographs immediately of the damage, because the water had jetted up through the boiler and all across the ceiling and the walls. So there's quite a lot of water damage, and obviously because the kitchen had flooded, the bottom part of the doors had actually started to swell. Next steps after that was to ring the insurance company. I made one phone call, told them what was happening, and the response back was brilliant from them, because they said, "What do you need to do?" I said, "We need a new boiler. This one is not working. It's not going to work. It's completely water damaged, been fused." And they just said, "Do whatever you need to do, put whatever you need to put in place, and then we'll send the assessor out to meet you in a couple of days' time." So within 48 hours, we literally got another boiler on the wall, my tenant back up and running, her family with hot water and heating, which was to my delight, because my ambition is to make sure that I look after my tenant and make sure that her family are, cared for in the home. I couldn't believe how simple it was. I was expecting a lot more rigmarole and a lot more stop-start through the process. And they really took the pain away from all of that. I didn't think I would get the instant response that I did on being able to just get an expert in to solve the problems there and then. I thought I would have to fill out some forms, speak to several people, wait for an assessor to come out, and none of that had to happen. They were just very empathetic with the situation, both for me and for my tenant. And yeah, incredible service. If there's any landlords out there that are in a similar situation to me, don't just go for the cheapest quote. Look at the policy cover, definitely investigate. What's your speed of response? If there's a problem in the property, how does it get dealt with on the claim side of it, and how quickly can I get my tenant back up and running, or even housed, or whatever the situation needs? Because I think those questions are vital, but you don't necessarily ask those questions before you purchase it. You tend to purchase most things on, oh well, it'll be covered, because you think it's always going to be all right. It's not until you really test the insurance policy by a disaster that happens that you learn how effective your insurance cover is.
First things first, as a landlord, let's understand what you need to insure and why. I'm joined by Christina Dimitrov from Direct Line, who better to help guide us through the different elements of insurance landlords need to consider. So, Christina, could you kind of talk us through the basics of what I need to think about?
So, Kate, I'd like to start with really what's the difference between home and landlord insurance. As somebody who buys home insurance, you are insuring something that you personally own, and in a way, you yourself are the risk. Whereas when you talk about landlord insurance, this is not your personal belongings that you insure, but it's an investment. So what it is that you do via buying insurance is you're effectively protecting your investment. And that's when the major differences start coming in. So, and I can clarify that a bit more when I talk about your tenants. Your tenants are a third party. They are also paying customers.
Of course.
And because they're paying, they have duties, of course, but they also have certain rights. And they're very different from somebody who occupies their own home. And to give you an example, if there is a fire that causes damage to the property you're renting out, your tenants need to live somewhere else temporarily, then your insurance, your landlord insurance, would be able to cover this temporary accommodation until the damage has been fixed and the tenants can move back in. This is something that home insurance wouldn't provide. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to run you through the most frequent covers that you'll need, and I'll just tell you the difference between home and landlord insurance.
Fantastic.
So we'll start with the, really well-known traditional covers. We've got buildings cover and contents cover. So buildings cover really is all about the structure of the building and anything that's fixed inside the building that you can't just move away, but that you'd have to almost rip off. So we've got carpets on the floor, we've got certain fixed kitchens or a fixed bath. These are the things that a building's cover provides. So any damage that's caused to them, accidental damage, is covered by that. Now, on the other hand, we've got contents insurance. For example, if you provide your tenant with a freestanding fridge or a TV or maybe even some furniture, that would be covered by contents insurance. And that's kind of similar to home insurance. But then comes another element, which is public liability. So public liability generally refers to a third party that wasn't involved in an accident, but that caused it.
Right.
So a tenant slips over some sort of loose bit of carpet. He has already informed you that this bit has been loose. So you as a landlord know about it, but you haven't been able to fix it. You didn't come, I don't know, something happened. Then your tenant fell over. He or she hurt themselves, and they also broke grandma's china. So we've got two sorts of damages that you are responsible for. We've got an injury to the person, and we've got damage to something that they belong to.
The tenant owns.
Exactly, and it's a financial damage. So they could make a claim against you for both of these things. They might demand compensation, and that might cause some legal proceedings. Any of that would be covered by public liability. So you need to have that as a landlord. It really is essential. The other bit is there is a number of, we call it mostly it's optional covers. By optional covers, what we mean in insurance is they're not added as standard. And the reason we don't add them as standard is because they're usually a little higher priced, and maybe it's something that doesn't happen so often. But if it does happen, it's likely to hurt you a lot. So you should really consider these covers for your personal situation. One example is rent guarantee, and it's often linked to another cover called legal expenses. So if your tenant has not been able to pay their rent, and you still want to secure your rental income because it is an income for you. So what rent guarantee does is it allows you to still receive your income, and that's being paid to you by your insurance until your tenant can pay again and is out of the arrears. Now, if the situation gets worse, your tenant can't pay at all anymore, anything happens, the legal expenses bit will help you with gaining repossession of the property, of getting the tenant out, evicting them off the property. And now, again, if the property needs some sort of repair work, then rent guarantee would cover your lost rent whilst you are repairing that property. So it's a very useful cover, something that you should consider. And the other one that I think is quite notable is the one that's called malicious damage. So
sounds quite scary.
It sounds scary, and there's two different types, and you need to be aware when you buy your insurance by that. Often malicious damage by third parties is provided as standard, but malicious damage by tenants is something you might have to buy as an add-on.
I see.
So that's really when something is damaged inside your property, but it wasn't accidental. It was something that was done deliberately to cause you damage. It can be of various types: broken down furniture, destroyed baths. So this really covers you if the tenant has caused this damage, it's been deliberate, you need to repair it, and again, your insurer does jump in. So you can see that landlord insurance is so much wider than home insurance, and the issues that a landlord insurer would deal with are much more complex.
Thanks, Christina. Tremendously helpful to know the different types of cover landlords should consider. Now, having explained the basics of financing and covering your buy-to-let, I spoke to Carrie Alliston, Head of Lettings for Hunters Agents, to explain the costs of buy-to-let and how they impact on property management. So, Carrie, you're Head of Lettings for Hunters Agents. We've got a list of costs that I put together that buy-to-let landlords are going to have to pay out when buying and managing a property. And I wanted to run through some of these with you. So when you're buying, you've got things like deposit, legal fees, mortgage fees, of course the 3% stamp duty now if it's a second home. But the one I wanted to talk to you about is the survey fee, because it tells you what maintenance payments they're going to have to pay out, doesn't it?
That's right, yes. It's really important to have that done, because what they need to do is realise at the beginning what it is that might be required works-wise to the property to have the safest property, the best property that you can have for a tenant, good quality. I think it's really important to know what works might be required so that they can budget what they might need to spend to bring it up to standard, whether that's in terms of furnishings or how it looks, but also really importantly from a safety aspect. So it's really worthwhile having it and spending the money on it so that they know what's going to be coming up in the future.
So when it comes to gas and electrical safety certificates, gas is a must, but electricity is a little bit more grey.
The gas safety checks is a legal responsibility, so that has to be done at the beginning of the tenancy, if there isn't one in place already, and then that has to be checked annually by a contractor that is gas safe registered. So it's important to check that that's the case and factor in that cost. In terms of the electrics, I think that's just as important. It is a bit of a grey area, it can be, but we feel that it's not. A test should be done on the portable appliances and the property itself to make sure it's safe for someone to live in. You don't want people getting electrocuted, and especially you don't want appliances blowing up. That's not safe and it's not good practice.
So one of the other questions is about putting money aside for renovation for a property before you let. What sorts of things are you going to have to do so that it's legally let to a tenant?
You take into account the age of the property and then think about what's going to be required. If you're looking at electrics, they might need rewiring in the future. You think of guttering, roofs,
Guttering's a great one because there's always see a lot of leaking gutters around everywhere.
Absolutely. And you've got to think of the knock-on effect to the tenant living there, but also for the landlord themselves in terms of the cost for repairing or replacing those sorts of things. If it's not done, the additional damage that can cause.
And I guess that affects the value. So if it's costing a few quid to get it fixed early on, better to do that than lose thousands of pounds off the value of your home.
The other thing to think about with broken or damaged guttering, it might mean that a let might not happen as quickly as you hoped.
So the next question is about utilities. When it comes to gas, electrics, water, whose responsibility is that? Is it all the landlords or does the tenant pay?
The tenant is responsible for the payment of the utilities once they've moved in. Until that point, the landlord has to pay for it whilst it's empty. Some council tax offices will have different schemes of whether it's empty or not, whether it's furnished or not, but the landlord is responsible until the tenant moves out and then after the tenant moves out. There are occasions where landlords will do a rent inclusive of bills, but that's not as normal as otherwise.
And how do you manage, so can the tenant just choose, can they change the electrics or do they have to get a landlord's permission?
To change the supplier, normally they should seek permission just so that the landlord is aware of who the supplier is, so that when the tenant moves out they know who it is, so that they can then make sure that they're paying the bills as they should be.
The other question, which I think is quite a big one, is when it comes to maintenance. So we kind of spoke about that earlier on, but maintenance I think is absolutely key. Not all landlords put money aside for that, do they?
The maintenance side of things can be more difficult, but I think most landlords are professional and they realise their responsibilities. Things like fixing boilers, making sure they've got heating, hot water, looking after the roof, even down to things if the shelf falls down. You know, it's making sure that those things are sorted out because, you know, that's going to get you a good relationship with your tenant ongoing.
Okay, and I guess what landlords need to think about is that it's not a cost, but it's an investment that helps hold the value of the property, which is quite important, isn't it?
It is, of course, yes, because also, you know, a tenant that is looked after will also look after the property. So when that tenant moves out, it is an investment because when you want to re-let the property, it's already usually in a good condition because the tenants have cared for it.
And that leads us neatly on to the final thing, which is voids when the property is empty. So that's quite a big issue, isn't it? If it's not in good condition, it may take you longer to let that property.
A month or two voids are highly unusual, definitely. We typically will re-let a property with only a week to 10 days in between.
If it's in good condition?
If it's in good condition, yeah. The way I always think about it when I speak to landlords is, would you live there? And that's kind of the standard that you need to have in your mind when you're looking at putting the property on the market the first time, the second time and the third time, however long that might go on. And if it's been well maintained, that's going to be so much easier. Your agent is there to help you with those sorts of things. They're your eyes and ears, so thinking about the maintenance as an ongoing responsibility and job is going to pay off for you.
There are lots of things to consider when you invest in buy-to-let, from the marketing of your property to making sure you get financing and insurance right and have money for maintenance. Here on the Buy-to-Let Show, we aim to bring you all the information you need to run a successful buy-to-let. You can find more advice and help by following these links. And you can download our special ebook, which goes with the programme.